In my presentation, I try to stick to the 5 briefing questions from Katanak. So I will give a very short introduction about myself, about my research background. I will then try to summarize my research first in one sentence and then maybe explain a little bit more. I will try to give you some of the key findings of our research and why this matters for children, how this could impact children's lives in the long run. So without further ado, I would like to first speak a little bit about myself, but I'll try to keep this short. I grew up and went to school in Lucerne in Switzerland, which is a very nice town in the center of Switzerland. You can see a little picture here on the right. I then did a little bit of hopping around the globe for my university education. So I first started in Switzerland, where I studied biochemistry and neuroscience in Zurich. And then I moved to Geneva, where I did a PhD in social neuroscience. But then I took quite a leap to Stanford University in California, where I did a postdoc for 2 years, and then moved back across the Atlantic to Germany, where I was for the last about 5 to 6 years in Leipzig in Eastern Germany at the Max Planck Institute. And finally, I did a quite small jump in relation to the others to go back to stay within Europe, but come to the UK, where I am right now since 2000 and 2000, so since last year, lecture in psychology at the University of Essex in Colchester, and the psychology department is here, where the red circle is. So quite a lot of moving around. I hope I can stay here for quite a while and also, yeah, settle down as well, which would be nice for my kids as well. So this already is everything to my biography. And without further ado, I would like to move to the research background to give you a short overview. So as Amy Baker has already said, a big part of my research is devoted to studying the social neuroscience of human attachment. And I do so by combining 2 main elements. So on the one hand, I use social neuroscience methods to look into the brain of individuals, but also interacting people. And I do so by techniques such as functional magnetic resonance imaging that you can see here on the left, but also by functional near-infrared spectroscopy hyperscanning, where we measure brain activity from 2 people interacting with each other. And I combine this with the assessment of attachment derived from attachment theory that's now already 70 years old. That was described first by John Bowlby and Mary Ainsworth in the 1950s and 1960s. And that relates to the question how we form and maintain relationships across the lifespan. And I do so by using different techniques, by using interviews, semi-structured tasks, behavioral observations, but also by using questionnaires. And I then relate those 2 elements with each other to derive the social neuroscience of human attachment. Now, I would like to focus a little bit on what results from combining these 2 elements to the social neuroscience of attachment, and to give you a short research summary. And yeah, one goal was to put this in one sentence, so I gave it a try, and I formulated a question. So the main question of my research is, how are individual differences in attachment and caregiving related to brain anatomy and function, as well as to biobehavioral and brain-to-brain synchrony? And this is quite a question, so I will try to break it down in the next 2 slides. But you can already see from these questions that there are 2 main elements, and I will try to explain a little bit what it actually means to be looking at those 2 elements. So on the one hand, the first approach of my research is concerned with establishing how attachment works within the individual brain of children, of adolescents, of adults across the lifespan. And to do so, me and some of my colleagues have developed 2 models of the functional neuroanatomical organization of attachment in humans. And even though these models might not be too simple, I think they're pretty intuitive. And I will just try to show you one of these models to make you understand a little bit how we are thinking and how we are trying to break down different attachment behaviors and to link them to brain activity and structure. So imagine that you have a child that is content and happy and that is well balanced psychologically and physiologically. So it's in a relaxed mood, everything is fine. And then something happens that upsets the child. It can be something in the environment, but it can also be something internal. So it could be hunger, thirst. It could be that the child is cold, but it could also be something from outside that scares the child. So the natural reaction, of course, then is to become alerted, because this occurrence in the environment or inside the child's body will trigger a deviation from the child's balance. So the child will no longer be physiologically or mentally balanced, and therefore this change in the condition of the child will require some action. And in attachment theory, what we think is that this triggers the attachment behavioral system, because the child will then reach out to others for help. Please help me. I cannot deal with this by myself. I need your help. And ideally, if the child starts to reach out to look for physical proximity, there will be a caregiver who is available and who is responsive and who will help the child to regulate whatever brought the child out of balance. So it tried to take away the fear, the discomfort, and to soothe the child. If this works properly, and if the child feels comforted by the caregiver, then it will return to its physical and mental balance. So the balance will be restored. And this by itself will make the child already feel better, because the fear will go away. The child will no longer be cold. It will no longer be hungry. So this will feel good for the child. In addition, through those soothing interactions, the child will actually get some positive influence from the caregiver. It will be cuddled, it will be hugged, there will be physical contact, there will be soothing words. Maybe the mother or the father will sing something or just talk to the child. And this will also make the child feel good. And if those interactions happen repeatedly, then of course the child will start to associate these social interactions with some positive and rewarding feelings. And that's exactly what is then the final outcome if these interactions are repeated over and over again, that the child will start to build predictions about how easy it is to solicit help, how efficient he or she is to get help, how responsive, how available others are. And this is the core of attachment, because this will then form the so-called internal working models that will predict how other interaction partners will be approached later on in life. And what we try to do, of course, with all of this is to put it into some kind of biological mechanism to associate different brain regions, different brain modules, as we call them, with those different processes, and to then look at individual differences in those brain areas to really understand how attachment works on a neurobiological level. So this is the first approach that we are ensuing in individuals. But then the second approach, that is a little bit newer, is that we don't only look at one person at a time, but we actually look at two people at a time. And we don't only look at brain anatomy and function in one person, but we actually look at how the brains of two people synchronize with each other when they do something together. And we particularly do so with parent-child dyads, both fathers with their children and mothers with their children. So we try to see how they respond to each other if they work together, and what this could tell us about the relationship quality, about the attachment quality, about the caregiving quality. And so far, we have been doing this in mothers and fathers with their infants separately. But ideally, we would then also look at the whole triad to see also how mothers and fathers synchronize with each other and how this affects the children. And ultimately, we hope that this will give us some insights about family functioning and about which factors are good for family cohesion and a good relationship between each other, and which factors might maybe be detrimental, because more synchrony is not always better, right? If, for example, the parent is stressed then it's not that good if the child also becomes stressed and synchronizes with the stress. So we can also think about how we can break these negative relationships and negative patterns. And here it's the same, because the synchrony is also related to predictions about how easy it is to predict what others are doing, how easy it is to get in sync with each other. And therefore, this is also quite nicely linked to attachment theory, that at its core is about predictions, how we relate to others and how we interact with others. So this leads me to the key findings that we have so far obtained from our research. And I would like to start by saying that how we socially interact and connect with others is reflected in our brain's anatomy and function, as well as in how we establish brain-to-brain and biobehavioral synchrony more generally with others. So we know now that our social interactions are reflected in our brain activity and our brain structure, but also in the measures of synchrony between each other. Growing a social brain development in children, is an interpersonal process. It is related to our predictions of how likely it is that others will help us when we need them, and how efficient and effective we think we are in eliciting the desired help. So growing up is a lot about learning how to relate to others, how they will respond to us, and what is a good way to eliciting help, and when it doesn't work. So it's really about starting to build a social map of who is there, in which situation, who can help us, who cannot help us, how much do we have to invest in getting help. And that will, of course, then determine how we approach others when we are older. Attachment theory provides a very good psychology framework from which to assess these predictions and efficiency mechanisms, especially if combined with the social neuroscience perspective, because it helps us understand on an objective physiological, neurobiological level how these mechanisms work and how we can maybe even influence them later on. And the understanding of these relationships advances our insight into the role of attachment for our lives and what it really means on the level of our body and the brain, and used neurobiologically to be attached to care for somebody else. I think these are the key findings so far, but we are still working on extending them and refining them in the future. And finally, why is this research important? How could it potentially impact children? So as I've already said, children learn and thus grow by interacting and connecting with others. And therefore, early social interactions are key for child development. Each interaction counts. Each interaction gives children some more information about how the social world around them works and how they can interact with this world and how they can adapt their behavior to different environments. Through repeated interactions or consistent interaction patterns, children start forming predictions about themselves and others, and thus about the world, the social world around them. These predictions, we know now, become engraved deep within the brain, in the structure and in the functioning of the brain. And thus, we as children's interaction partners directly shape children's brain development, how they grow their social brains. And therefore, learning more about this social interdependence of child development by combining attachment theory with social neuroscience methods can help better understanding our roles in children's lives, raise our awareness of how strongly we actually influence child development, and hopefully offer future avenues for prevention and intervention, where we can take these insights and develop new strategies to help children, especially those in need, and therefore improve children's lives. Now, before finishing, I would just like to say that the work I have presented, or the work that I'm doing, is a collaboration between many different people, between many different universities, many different organizations, and I'm very grateful for all the support, because without working together with these funding bodies and organizations, none of this would have been possible. And with this, I'm already at the end of my short presentation. I hope I was able to give you some insights into my work.